It's been almost 2 years now since the remake of the 1993 classic came out. Almost. Going from a 2D top-down Game Boy classic to a 3D top-down Switch exclusive. I finally took the time to fire up my Switch and finish this title to see if the hype was real. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing as I have other game reviews up and coming in the future. Now let's get into reviewing Link's Awakening. Legend of Zelda is definitely in my top 5 most beloved game series. Anytime I can get my hands on controlling Link and help achieve his destiny, I'm there. But like many Zelda fans, I didn't start out playing the very early games. The first title in the series I played and beat as a kid was Ocarina of Time. From there it was a chain reaction of playing and beating any other titles in the series I could get my hands on going forward. Unfortunately, I never owned a Game Boy and didn't own a Nintendo system since the GameCube, until 2016 when I finally decided to get my hands on a DS. Then finally, the love of my life gifted me a Switch in 2018, with Breath of the Wild all in one. Talk about being one lucky man, huh? The following year, Link's Awakening Remake was announced, then released into September. Since this was a title I never got the opportunity to play, I immediately put it in my wish list and bought it during the fall. Link's Awakening is a breath of fresh air. While very linear, it overemphasizes world exploration through task and curiosity. First things first, let's get down to the obvious. The visuals have been upgraded from 32 bits to a crisp 1080p resolution. All the 2D art from the Game Boy Classic have been upgraded to 3D. From the character models, enemies, environments, dungeons, and etc. Although the graphics have been updated, the style is still the same, giving it a miniature, childlike, cutesy look that will draw in children or grown-ups who are into sappy-like games such as Animal Crossing. The way that Link, the side characters, enemies, and simply any living creature in the wild interact with each other and the environment is very detailed. Their reactions and responses, for instance, when Link talks to NPCs, you can see him bob his head, indicating that he is listening to them speak. Or when Link is in the vicinity of an enemy like moblins in the wild, they will jump in panic and get ready to attack Link. Other cool animations specified to Link are when he pushes and pulls objects and is unable to. He'll show animations accompanied with sounds of him struggling to make it more believable. Attacks have a nice slicing effect that is very cartoonish, but emphasizes the width and intensity of the attack. The shield also has its own display when used effectively, whether when deflecting or parrying enemy attacks. Other items also have their own beautiful animations as well, such as the deluxe shovel, magic powder, and etc., but we can get more into that later on. The content provided is pretty satisfying. This is a Zelda game through and through. Just like the OG game from the Game Boy days, it stays true to its core. Immediately from being able to control Link, you're off into the world to explore. As you explore, you find all kinds of neat areas, secrets, creatures, and items to aid you in your quest. Like most Zelda games, there are item shops, mini games like fishing and training games, secrets to find like pieces of hearts, important items like dungeon keys, seashells, etc. There are some interesting side quests. For instance, giving a sleepy toadstool to a witch, in return she brews your first batch of magic powder in order to restore Tarin after turning into a mischievous raccoon. Having Marin sing to a lazy walrus as blocking your path to a new area on the map, leading a ghost to his abandoned home, then his grave in order for it to find peace and death. In return, it gives you an empty bottle and many other side quests like that. Most of the side quests are connected to the main story. Lastly, and most important of all that Breath of the Wild was missing, the dungeons, and 8 of them at that. You even have the ability to create and explore your own dungeons at Dampé's place. As usual, in each dungeon is a map, compass, keys, special owl beasts for information, and key inventory items, like the bow and arrow, bombs, hookshot, Pegasus boots, and etc. Of course, you can't have dungeons without classic dungeon mini-bosses, sub-boss, and the main dungeon boss. Some were easy to figure out, some were elusive and difficult to defeat, both dungeon and dungeon boss that is. Most of the gameplay is what you'd expect from a Zelda game. Walk around, talk to NPCs, Walk around, find some secrets. Walk around, make sure you don't die from the enemies in the wild. No, honestly, even though it sounds repetitive and boring, the way it is put together makes each new area a new challenge. I have to say, this is probably one of the strongest young Links in the timeline. One slash on his sword and most enemies are down for the count. If their hide is tougher, then it's 2 slashes. There's a really cool mechanic where some enemies will drop these attack and defense power-ups in form of a defense acorn and pieces of power. These temporarily boost your attack and or defense for about 10 seconds. As always, anytime you find a new inventory item from a dungeon or elsewhere, it gives you an opportunity to reach or open a pathway that was previously unavailable to you. Finding secrets like pieces of a heart, or even a key item like the ocarina. Each region has their own specified enemy that belongs to the atmosphere, and some can only be defeated by certain weapons or a combination of them, like using a hookshot to freeze an enemy, then using your sword or bow and arrow to finish the job. Dungeons are good, and typically they all have their own themes, but they all must be done in a sequence. Unlike a lot of recent titles in the series where you can choose which dungeon to undergo first, in Link's Awakening, they are tied to the plot. Most of the dungeons will take about an hour and a half to complete, depending on your ability to figure out things quickly. Most of the enemies are clever, and if you're not careful, will leave you running around with less than 3 hearts full. Classic dungeons tend to be most challenging like that. The plot is not the usual. Of course, if you're already familiar with Link's Awakening, then this isn't news to you. For those who didn't get a chance to experience this title back in the day like myself, you will now get the experience in updated format. Warning, for those who want to play and experience this on their own, please skip this part. Link's Awakening, like many Legend of Zelda titles, is a bit of a side story. It is one of the stories that encompasses the same Link from a previous game, and in this instance, this is the same Link from the Link to the Past. But unlike A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening does not take place in Hyrule. We find Link exploring the seas on a boat, when one stormy night he becomes shipwrecked. He is found by Marin on the shore and wakes up days later in her home, and she reveals to him he is on Koholint Island. Once Link is okay to go out, Tarin gives him his Hylian shield. Link steps out into Mabe village, heads to the shore where he was found and finds his trusty sword. Before he takes up arms, a mysterious talking owl shows up and informs Link that in order to leave the island, he must wake the Windfish. Throughout the story, it is the owl that guides Link to where he needs to go and what he needs to do. After retrieving the first dungeon key, the owl guides him to the first dungeon. Once Link defeats the first dungeon boss, acquiring the musical instrument, he informs him that this is one of the 8 instruments of the sirens needed to wake the Windfish. After acquiring 7 instruments and helping Marin, the owl reveals that the song she sings is the Ballad of the Windfish, and it is the song needed to wake the Windfish. Once all 8 instruments are in Link's possession, he plays the ballad atop the mountain where the Windfish egg rests, and the egg cracks open. After defeating the final nightmare inside the egg, Link meets with the owl for the last time, and he reveals that he is a figment of the Windfish's spirit, and the guardian of its dream world, aka Koholint Island. Once the Windfish wakes, Koholint disappears and fades into memory. Link wakes up again out in sea or shipwrecked, to Marin singing and the Windfish swimming off through the sky. I must say, this was pretty enjoyable. So should you play Link's Awakening in 2021? Yeah, especially if you're a Legend of Zelda fan and like a game you can beat within 2 to 3 hours repeatedly. Why the hell not? I may be a bit biased because I love the Legend of Zelda series, but rarely do you find anyone who doesn't like Legend of Zelda. If you enjoyed this video and my take on Link's Awakening Remake, drop a like for your boy and go check out my other Legend of Zelda videos on the channel. I have a few I made in the prior year making predictions for the Breath of the Wild sequel. They will be linked in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and check your settings for your subscriptions as well. As always, you know the vibes. It's Kaizoku Sleven. Appreciate you.